Noam, good to see you.
Yeah, always fun, always fun.
Yeah, we're back here doing it again.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your research into access and hacking IP cameras. What motivated you to look at this particular set of technology?
So I think one of the main reasons why we chose to look at access was recent movement in the industry to keep on banning Chinese-made IoT devices. And I think when we're thinking about Chinese-made IoT devices that are being banned, IP cameras is the go-to immediate device type we're thinking about. And we do see a very big increase in these devices being banned from more countries, more industries. Currently in the US, they have very limited capabilities to use Chinese-made IP cameras in government facilities, medical facilities, stuff like that. The same is following in the EU and UK, and I believe we'll only see an increase in the number of devices that are being banned, type of devices. And the main reason for that is I believe that they have security issues, potential security issues in these devices, and it could lead to espionage, it could lead to data theft, the ability for Chinese actors to hack their way into the networks. And because of that, it actually causes a ripple effect, because limiting the companies from choosing their devices, from being only Western brands, means that they can choose from very limited subset of companies.
Right.
And this is exactly the case in IP cameras, where Axis Communications, a Swedish vendor, is one of the bigger brands in this world. And because of that, we see a very big increase, a very big usage of this brand around the world, however, more specifically in the States. And I think my goal in this research was twofold. First, I want to see what kind of vulnerabilities could be exploited on these type of devices. And second, I wanted to do essentially showcase what exploiting these vulnerabilities could lead to. Like James Bond style attacks of espionage, literally gaining control over cameras, seeing the feed, and even altering it however the attackers choose.
So before we get into the research, we should say that Axis is a Swedish company, and when an organization buys from any of these types of vendors, you're talking about potentially hundreds of cameras in some organizations. There's some scale here.
Exactly. I mean, Axis is not a brand that is aimed towards consumers. It's not something you would find in somebody's home.
Right.
Instead, it's very enterprise ready, enterprise grade, enterprise geared towards enterprises. And I'm sure, like we can guess, enterprises could have a fleet of hundreds and even thousands of different cameras monitoring all the different floors, facilities, warehouses, entrances, exits, stuff like that.
Right.
And like you've said, we see hundreds, thousands of cameras being used by big organizations, and by affecting the main servers that control and manage these cameras, you're actually able to move laterally and attack these cameras as well.
So are these cameras, as you started your research, are they exposed online? Are they reachable online?
So many cases, these cameras are not exposed online, and instead vendors and actually organizations choose to expose the management services. Essentially, think of one centralized server that manages, controls, and actually consumes the camera feed from all of your camera fleet. And in many times, even if the cameras themselves are not exported, once again, we are talking about thousands of cameras.
Sure.
Instead, the organization would choose to expose the management service. And that way they can connect remotely, view the feed remotely, monitor that everything works, and actually access the camera video feed.
So what are some of the risks that we're looking at here? Is it control of the camera? You kind of talked a little bit about it from a higher level.
So the risk is composed of three main things. First, by attacking the management servers, an attacker would gain a foothold and an entryway into organization's network, and is able to actually leverage their way into the internal network from the internet, from the exposed internet. And once they are there, they can move laterally, they can gain more leverage in the network, they can dump dump credentials, exfiltrate information, anything they choose. However, the second danger of this type of vulnerabilities is actually moving laterally and using intended business logic to move into the cameras themselves. Because we need to remember that the server actually manages the cameras. This is the intended behavior. And by only using legitimate features, an attacker that gains control over the server, management server, can actually move and attack the cameras themselves. And once again, move laterally, move in the networks of the cameras, attack adjacent devices, and like we've said, even attack the business logic, the cameras themselves.
Right.
Export information, camera feed, and even alter it however they choose to.
So let's talk about the research itself. I know you found 4 vulnerabilities, I believe, and it's not just in the management server. There were issues with the protocol, correct?
Exactly. I mean, when we looked at the Access solution, we tackled the proprietary protocol named Access Remoting. And this protocol is used for clients and server to communicate with the server appliance, essentially the management server and the viewer that controls and consumes the camera feeds. And by dissecting this protocol, we managed to find protocol level vulnerabilities in the protocols itself, allowing an attacker, an unauthenticated attacker, to execute code on the server itself and essentially gain full control over the entire server.
And so how difficult is it to execute an attack, for example? What would an actual attack look like? I'm sure there are variations depending on the vulnerability they're targeting.
Exactly. We built a few attack scenarios that could be exploited by attackers out there. The first one is the core vulnerabilities that all attack scenarios use, which is a deserialization vulnerability in the Access Remoting protocol, essentially allowing the creation of arbitrary classes, which in .NET leads to code execution. Now, in order to execute and actually use this feature, an attacker would need to connect to the server. And to do that, they, at least originally, need to have proper credentials to authenticate to the server. And that's when we built the first attack scenario involving a pass the hash, pass the challenge type of attack, essentially sitting in the middle between the client and the server and intercepting requests, forwarding the challenge and the response, forwarding the authentication credentials, and passing the authentication requirement. Once we do that, we are actually authenticated and we can execute and invoke the vulnerability and execute code on both the server and the client because they both use the vulnerable access remoting protocol.
So would an attacker be required, for example, to decrypt credentials that they find in traffic or something like that?
No, there's no need to decrypt anything, there's no need to brute force. Once you have a man in the middle, you simply pass along a request and a response, and then you have an authenticated challenge that you can alter however you fit, or you deem necessary. Now, in addition to this attack scenario, which does require man in the middle, we also discovered and developed an even more severe attack scenario.
Our program is about to begin. Please take your seats.
Where an unauthenticated attacker can execute code on an Access server without any need for user interaction, man in the middle, or even credentials. This is done by finding an authentication bypass vulnerability in a similar service, a fallback service, that enables the attacker to bypass the authentication restriction and actually send the deserialization payload, executing code on the vulnerable server.
So I'm an attacker, I have control of the camera, I have control of the server, I'm executing code. What can I do? Is it as simple as shutting off camera feeds, or take me inside what's possible?
So once you control the server, you are essentially the admin, the owner of these cameras, and you can do whatever you want with them. The first example is simply downloading and installing a malicious package on each and every camera, and then you are able to execute whatever code you want on the camera.
Yeah.
Once you have that, you have the ability to do whatever you want, including shutting off the camera, altering the feed, consuming it, essentially giving you full control of the camera, originally I thought about it as a James Bond type of attack. Think of like pushing a false stream instead of the real camera stream, and that way you are able to have like fake video surveillance.
Right. So let's talk about the fix. I know you guys work closely with vendors on any disclosure. What does the fix look like? Did it require an overhaul at all, or is it simple, relatively simple?
So I give credit where credit is due, and we reported all these vulnerabilities to Axis, and their response was super wholesome with a shared goal of fixing everything, making sure their devices, their services are secure, and that attackers are unable to use these vulnerabilities. So once we reported the vulnerabilities to Axis, they've worked methodically to make sure that the vulnerabilities are fixed and that users are protected. Now, in order to actually apply the patches, all you need to do is install an update that is pop-up notification whenever you boot up the application, and then you're able to install the fix and make sure you are protected against these vulnerabilities.
How viable an attack vector is this? I mean, is it getting any attention?
It is. I mean, I think in general, in recent years, more and more attackers are targeting CPS, IoT devices in their attacks. The main reason is that it is essentially a black hole, that no one knows what's going on in it. There's no defensive security tools, no EDRs, no nothing. And this makes it a very viable and very nice to have target for attackers. And the answer is yeah. Attackers are targeting CPS devices and are even looking for actively disclosed new vulnerabilities to try and exploit out there in the wild. And Axis is just one example of these.
Yeah, I mean, we're here at Nexus Conference, and I know there have been a couple of talks already where they're seeing nation-state attackers, for example, target edge devices or other technology that doesn't support EDR. And it makes total sense, and that definitely applies to CPS.
Exactly, and this is exactly the move that we see attackers taking. Changing their behavior from bring the tool, bring the 0 days vulnerabilities and all of their abilities to hide their malware, changing from this point of view to the new point of view of living off the land, staying at uncharted territories like IoT, network devices that have no EDR, no antivirus, almost no monitoring. And that way, by staying and using what's available to them, they are able to stay undetected, stay hidden, and make sure they are never found out.
Your job's never boring.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.